Join Alex Cardinale as he discusses America's worst tragedies and emergencies. He will keep it real with you and share all the details about the emergency, how it could have been prevented, what we can learn from it, my thoughts and more. Tragedy can strike at any moment. Whether it's a fire, a medical emergency or a robbery, we should be prepared for it. Learn from these common tragedies. Post your thoughts in the comments. Now here is Alex Cardinale.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Keeping It Real with Alex Cardinale. I'm your host, Alex Cardinale. Today, I am going to talk about an awful tragedy that occurred on this day 21 years ago. Today, I am going to talk about the September 11th, 2001 terrorist attacks that happened right here in the great country of the United States of America. So today's tragedy that we're going to break down here on Keeping It Real with Alex Cardinale is a tragedy that affected the United States of America for many years, and it has affected the whole entire world as a whole, because it is the greatest terrorist attack to ever happen. And hopefully we'll never have such a big terrorist attack again, because it caused a lot of damage. Thousands of people lost their lives. We lost the Twin Towers. The Pentagon was damaged. The American economy took a huge hit. But most importantly, Americans lived in fear for years following 9/11/2001. Today we're going to talk about the entire tragedy and the aftermath of the tragedy, and how the events of 9/11 is still felt here in America. So, on this day, 21 years ago, the worst tragedy to ever strike America happened. America went under attack as terrorist hijacked planes smashed into the World Trade Center and the Pentagon and killed people. Nearly 3,000 people lost their lives. The World Trade Center was destroyed as both buildings collapsed, and America lived in fear for many years. So post your thoughts on this horrific tragedy in the comments. After I talk about the tragedy, I'm going to share my thoughts on this tragedy, and I'm also going to discuss what we as Americans learned from this tragedy. So let's go ahead and get this show started, and we're going to start by talking about the tragedy, the worst tragedy in America. So the September 11th, 2001 attacks were 4 coordinated suicide terrorist attacks carried out by the militant Islamic extremist network Al-Qaeda against the United States of America. On the morning of Tuesday, September 11th, 2001, 19 terrorists hijacked 4 commercial airline planes scheduled to travel from the northeastern U.S. to California. The hijackers crashed the first 2 planes into the Twin Towers of the World Trade Center in New York City, and the third plane into the Pentagon, which is the headquarters of the American military in Arlington, Virginia. The fourth plane was intended to hit a federal government building in Washington, D.C., but crashed in a field following a passenger revolt. So Flight 93, I often consider to be the heroic acts of this tragedy. The passengers of Flight 93 are the true heroes because they stopped the White House or the Capitol from being hit by a fourth plane. They stopped the hijackers, they took action, and it caused the hijackers to crash into an empty field, unfortunately killing those aboard Flight 93. The attacks killed nearly 3,000 people and instigated the global war on terror. So let's learn a little bit more on the tragedy in death. Now I'm going to read some of the stuff from Wikipedia because it does a better job of explaining the tragedy than I ever could. So we're going to learn about this tragedy in deaths. Early on the morning of September 11th, 2001, 19 hijackers took control of 4 commercial airliners, 2 Boeing 757s and 2 Boeing 767s en route to California. 3 of them headed to LAX in Los Angeles and 1 to SFO in San Francisco after takeoffs from Logan International Airport in Boston, Massachusetts, Newark Liberty International Airport in Newark, New Jersey, and Washington Dulles International Airport in London and Fairfax counties in Virginia. Large planes with long coast-to-coast flights were selected for hijacking because they would have more fuel, which means they would do more damage. The 4 flights were American Airlines Flight 11, a Boeing 767 aircraft, departed Logan Airport at 7:59 a.m. en route to Los Angeles with a crew of 11 and 76 passengers, not including the 5 hijackers. The hijackers flew this plane into the northern facade of the North Tower of the World Trade Center in New York City at 8:46 a.m. United Airlines Flight 175, a Boeing 767 aircraft, departed Logan Airport at 8:14 a.m. en route to Los Angeles with the crew of 9 and 51 passengers, not including the 5 hijackers. The hijackers flew the plane into the southern facade of the South Tower of the World Trade Center in New York City at 9:03 a.m. So just minutes after the first plane flew into the North Tower, another plane flew into the South Tower of the World Trade Center. American Airlines Flight 77, a Boeing 757 aircraft, departed Washington International Airport at 8:20 a.m. en route to Los Angeles with the crew of 6 and 53 passengers, not including the hijackers. The hijackers flew the plane into the western facade of the Pentagon in Arlington County, Virginia at 9:37 a.m. in the morning. And the final plane to be hijacked, United Airlines Flight 93, the miracle plane, I call it, a Boeing 757 aircraft, departed Newark International Airport at 8:42 a.m. en route to San Francisco with a crew of 7 and 33 passengers, not including 4 hijackers. As passengers attempted to subdue the hijackers, the aircraft crashed into a field in Stony Creek Township, Pennsylvania, near Shanksville at 10:03 a.m. in the morning. So the hijackers were successful 3 out of 4 times, unfortunately. The hijackers were able to fly both planes into the World Trade Center, and they were able to fly their plane into the western facade of the Pentagon. But the miracle plane, Flight 93, the passengers found out what was happening. They found out there were terror attacks on the United States of America. They subdued the hijackers. They fought them. And in the process, they made the hijackers crash Flight 93 into an empty field in Pennsylvania. Now, unfortunately, all 33 people on that plane, all those great heroic Americans, lost their lives. But they lost their lives in such a heroic way, and they did a great deed for America. They saved many other people's lives. They saved some American buildings, whether they were targeting the White House or the Capitol remains to be known, but they stopped yet another tragic event from happening. It's bad enough that on September 11th, 2001, we lost the World Trade Center. Both buildings eventually collapsed, and a lot of people died. Over 2,000 people lost their lives on this day 21 years ago. That is god awful. It's 21 years later, and I cannot believe this event happened. I was really young back then, so I really didn't understand what was going on. But I'm kind of glad that I was young back then, because if I was 29 years old back then when it happened, I would be a really devastated, distraught, destroyed American. But as a young child, you're innocent and you really don't know what's going on. But as I matured and I think back about 9/11, I feel bad for all the families that are destroyed, all the kids that lost their mother or their father in the terrible, terrible terrorist attacks. There's families that are broken. They don't have a father or a mother or a husband or a wife. It is just god awful. Nearly 3,000 people went to work that day thinking they were going to return home to be with their loved ones and their family. But then you've got these evil people from Al Qaeda that flew the planes into these buildings, ending their life. It really is such a terrible tragedy. It could have definitely been prevented, in my opinion. So let's talk about the attacks a little bit more in depth. At 8:46 a.m., 5 hijackers crashed American Airlines Flight 11 into the northern facade of the World Trade Center's North Tower, One World Trade Center. At 9:03 a.m., another 5 hijackers crashed United Airlines Flight 175 into the South Tower's southern facade, Two World Trade Center. 5 hijackers flew American Airlines Flight 77 into the Pentagon at 9:37 a.m. A 4th flight, United Airlines Flight 93, crashed near Shanksville, Pennsylvania, southeast of Pittsburgh at 10:03 a.m. after passengers fought the 4 hijackers. Flight 93's target is believed to have been either the Capitol or the White House. Flight 93's cockpit voice recorder revealed crew and passengers tried to seize control of the plane from the hijackers after learning through phone calls that flights 11, 77, and 175 had been crashed into buildings that morning. Once it became evident that the passengers might gain control, The hijackers rolled the plane and intentionally crashed it. The hijackers felt defeated, and all they had to do was crash the plane and kill the heroes that day. Very, very sad and tragic event. Some passengers and crew members who called from the aircraft using the cabin air phone service and mobile phones provided details. Several hijackers were aboard each plane. They used mace, tear gas, or pepper spray to overcome attendants, and some people aboard had been stabbed. Reports indicated hijackers stabbed and killed pilots, flight attendants, and one or more passengers. So even before the buildings got planes flown into them, there were people already dead on the planes. The passengers had been stabbed and killed, and some of the attendants. That's the beginning of this tragedy. You've got these Americans entering these planes thinking they're going on a vacation or a nice plane ride, and you got the hijackers that have mace, they've got tear gas, pepper spray, knives, they stab attendants, they stab passengers. A heroic event. And the passengers on these planes probably realized that they're going to die that day, and they had to make calls to their loved ones saying they love them. It's god awful. My heart and my thoughts and my prayers go to all the victims of this horrific tragedy, even 21 years later. A flight attendant on Flight 11, a passenger on Flight 175, and passengers on Flight 93 said the hijackers had bombs. But one of the passengers said he thought the bombs were fake. The FBI found no traces of explosives at the crash sites, and the 9/11 Commission concluded that the bombs were probably fake. 3 buildings in the World Trade Center collapsed due to fire-induced structure failure. The South Tower collapsed at 9:59 a.m., having burned for 56 minutes in a fire caused by the impact of United Airlines Flight 175 and the explosion of its fuel. The North Tower collapsed at 10:28 a.m. after burning for 102 minutes. When the North Tower collapsed, debris fell on the nearby 7 World Trade Center building, damaging the building and starting fires. These fires burned for nearly 7 hours, compromising the building's structural integrity, and 7 WTC collapsed at 5:21 p.m. The west side of the Pentagon sustained significant damage. The attacks are the deadliest terror attacks in world history, causing the deaths of 2,996 people, including the hijackers, and injuring more than 6,000 others. The death toll included 265 on the 4 planes, from which there were no survivors, 2,606 in the World Trade Center and in the surrounding area, and 125 at the Pentagon. Most who died were civilians. The rest included 343 firefighters, 72 law enforcement officers, 55 military personnel, and the 19 terrorists. After New York, New Jersey lost the most state citizens. More than 90 countries lost citizens in the attacks. For example, the 67 Britons who died were more than in any other terrorist attack anywhere. In Arlington County, Virginia, 125 Pentagon workers died when Flight 77 crashed into the building's western side. 70 were civilians and 55 were military personnel, many of whom worked for the United States Army or the United States Navy. The Army lost 47 civilian employees, 6 civilian contractors, and 22 soldiers, while the Navy lost 6 civilian employees, 3 civilian contractors, and 33 sailors. In New York City, more than 90% of the workers and visitors who had died in the towers had been at or above the points of impact. In the North Tower, 1,355 people at or above the point of impact were trapped and died of smoke inhalation, fell or jumped from the tower to escape the smoke and flames, or were killed in the building's collapse. The destruction of all three staircases in the tower when Flight 11 hit made it impossible for anyone above the impact zone to escape. 107 people below the point of impact died. In the South Tower, one stairwell, stairwell A, was left intact after Flight 175 hit, allowing 14 people located on the floors of impact, including a gentleman named Stanley Pramith, a man who saw the plane coming at him. He got out safe, and four more from the floors above to escape. New York City 911 operators who received calls from people inside the tower were not well informed of the situation as it rapidly unfolded. And as a result, unfortunately, they told callers not to descend the tower on their own. In total, 630 people died in the South Tower, fewer than half the number killed in the North Tower. Casualties in the South Tower were significantly reduced because some occupants decided to leave the building as soon as the North Tower was struck, and because Rick Rescorcola, head of security at Morgan Stanley, defied an order to remain in place and evacuated almost all of the company's 2,700 employees in the South Tower to safety after Flight 11 had struck the North Tower. The failure to order a full evacuation of the South Tower after the first jet crashed into the North Tower was described by USA Today as one of the day's greatest tragedies. I agree with that. At least 200 people fell or jumped to their death from the burning towers, landing on the streets and rooftops of adjacent buildings hundreds of feet below. Very, very sad way to die. It basically was either you get burned to death or you jump. And I think jumping is the best option there, unfortunately. Some occupants of each tower above the point of impact made their way toward the roof in the hope of helicopter rescue, but the roof access doors were locked. It probably would never work out anyway for a helicopter to be there. The intense heat, the smoke, there'd be no way for them to rescue people, and they wouldn't be able to see through the smoke. No plan existed for helicopter rescues, and the combination of roof equipment, thick smoke, and intense heat prevented helicopters from approaching. A total of 411 emergency workers died as they tried to rescue people and fight fires. The New York City Fire Department lost 343 firefighters, including a chaplain and two paramedics. The New York City Police Department lost 23 officers. The Port Authority Police Department lost 37 officers. 8 emergency medical technicians and paramedics from private emergency medical service units were sadly killed in the tragedy as well. So this was a very horrific day. 21 years ago, nearly 3,000 people were killed, and we still feel the effects from this tragedy because a lot of the 9/11 first responders are suffering from other health ailments, from cancer, leukemia, and other health problems from the dust and all the chemicals that were at the 9/11 World Trade Center Ground Zero site. So it was definitely a very terrible situation to be in. We have a question from a live viewer, and the question is, do you think Iraq attacked 9/11? That's a great question. The attack was orchestrated by Al Qaeda, which I believe is a terrorist group that is from Iraq. So it was a terrorist group from Iraq. However, I don't think the government Iraq had anything to do with it, but we did take care of Al Qaeda, thank God. So let me share my thoughts on the 9/11 tragedy. This was perhaps the worst tragedy that America has gone through. I mean, you lose two of your most historic buildings, the World Trade Center. You lose nearly 3,000 people. You lose a lot of first responders. And you lose a lot of money and buildings and loss of life. The loss of life is perhaps the most important because, like I said earlier in the show, families were destroyed. Families lost their parents, families lost their sons and daughters. So it was a very tragic and horrific event. Hopefully, we'll never ever have to deal with this type of thing ever again. But it's very important for us as Americans to always remember 9/11. We can never forget this day because if we forget this day, we'll forget about all the victims of this day, and we don't want to do that. We want to remember 9/11 as the day where someone tried to attack our country, but we remained strong. Because afterwards, we did remain strong, and we remained stronger than ever. Because today we have more security. Today we have a lot of technology. So technology can play a huge role in stopping attacks like this. And there hasn't really been such a huge terror attack after 9/11 because of our strategies on fighting terror and all the security that we have at every event, every airport now. So I feel a lot safer as an American after post 9/11. Unfortunately, it had to come to this. We lost some freedoms. Now we have to go through checks at airports and stuff, but that's for our safety. So really terrible tragedy. I don't know if this could have been prevented. Probably not. I think the Al Qaeda people are a bunch of sick, twisted individuals anyway. So maybe they got their rocks off watching people suffer. But very, very sad day. So my thoughts and my prayers go out to all the victims of 9/11, 2001, 21 years ago. Us Americans will never forget this this awful day. But one thing I remember from 9/11, 2001 from Americans is in despite of a fearful event, despite of what was going on around them, many people decided to play heroes. Many people put their lives on the line to rescue others. And I always, always value that, and I love that. I love that so many people went inside those burning buildings to pull people out and save other people. Unfortunately, those people that did play a hero, a lot of them didn't come out alive, but there's somebody that's alive because of them, and that will always be in that person's heart. Though they may feel a little sad that the person that saved them perished, but they perished for a reason. They're like God's angel. They perished to save other people. So while they may not be living on planet Earth anymore, they're still an angel up in heaven. That's what I've been told, and that's how I feel about this situation. It's a very, very sad situation, but as Americans, that's how we act in the face of adversity. We band together and we become heroes. And there are plenty of American heroes from 9/11, and that's what I love about America. We band together and we support each other. Sure, we may have our political differences, but in the time of need, we come together and we help each other out. So, what we learned from 9/11 is to love each other, No matter our political differences, no matter the skin color, or sexual orientation, or any of that stuff, we learn to love each other for people that they are. We also learn that being a hero is great. Saving people in their time of need is a great thing. But most importantly, what Americans have learned is that we are not afraid of anybody or anything. And in the face of adversity, we can overcome tragic events just like this one. And we have. We have definitely overcome 9/11. And I'm glad every day or every year on September 11th, we can remember all the victims that lost their lives. Sure, we rebuild the World Trade Center. We do have a new World Trade Center, but we can never replace the nearly 3,000 people that lost their lives. So I'd like to end this show with a quick moment of silence honoring the victims that perished on this awful day 21 years ago. All right, guys, thank you so much for the moment of silence. So I want to thank you all for tuning in to this episode of Keeping It Real with Alex Cardinale. It was a rather sad show to do. Very, very sad that I had to talk about the events of what happened 21 years ago. But it's also very important to talk about because we can never forget this day. The next tragedy that I'm going to talk about is Hurricane Katrina. So stay tuned to learn about how Hurricane Katrina affected America. Stay safe, everybody. Tell your family and friends you love them because you never know when your last day on this earth could be. 9/11 is a positive and a good example of that because a lot of people went to work that day thinking they were going to come home and enjoy themselves, but unfortunately, they lost their life to this horrific tragedy. So always remember to say you love your family and your friends because you never know what could happen. I'm Alex Cardinale, and you've been watching Keeping It Real with Alex Cardinale on the legendary Alex Cardinale YouTube channel. If you're a new viewer, make sure to subscribe to my YouTube channel, the legendary Alex Cardinale. Have a great week, everybody, and thank you so much for watching. And definitely stay safe.